Hello, my name is Crystal. I am a senior at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. I am majoring in business administration with a focus in accounting. My research is titled One Step Forward and Three Steps Back, Women in the Workplace During a Global Pandemic. Today we will cover a little bit of background about women in the workplace, how the pandemic is reinstating gender roles through the responsibilities that women have had to take on, what is a male versus a female-dominated profession, and what firms can do to protect their women going forward so that they don't lose the progress they have made in the business industries. So a little bit of background of women in the workplace. Prior to World War II in the early 1900s, the role of women was to maintain the household and raise their children. The draft of the war brought the era of Rosie the Riveter, where women were going to work in factories to assist with the supply and demand of war material. For most women, this was their first chance to step away from the role of housewife and assume a role in the workplace. This was short-lived, however, as the vets returned to their jobs after the war, women returned to their household duties. Post-World War II was a time of rising opportunity for women. More women were graduating from high school, they were continuing their education through postgraduate programs and even seeking collegiate opportunities. Technology was improving, which created an increased demand for clerical workers, roles that were often filled by women in the workplace. This initiated the stigma of women needing cleaner or safer jobs because their first jobs were clerical opportunities where they were not working out in the fields with the men. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission started to implement various forms of legislation as women became more noticeable in the workplace because controversial issues around gender discrimination began to appear. The first was the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which said no employer shall discriminate on the basis of gender by paying wages less than what they pay to the opposite gender. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 said that employers may not discriminate against hiring any individual on the basis of their race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 was an amendment to the Civil Rights Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. The rise of the global coronavirus pandemic has begun to reinstitute gender-specific roles among families and households. The first members of the workforce to take on the extra responsibility of the new remote learning format were women. Mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and sisters put their careers and jobs at risk to assume the role of caretaker for both children and sick family members. Women who were fortunate enough to be in a career that still allowed them to continue working were expected by many employers to transition to a remote environment or even give up their jobs entirely to assist in household responsibilities. A Women in the Workplace study showed a frightening statistic from 2020. The statistic said 1 in 4 women are considering downshifting in their careers to a reduced workload or leaving the workforce altogether. Of these women, the majority were senior level management or corporate officers. In a world where women have worked so hard to get into senior level positions and become corporate officers or corporate executives, it is so disheartening to hear that they are now willing to give up their jobs and step down to a lower position because of the added responsibility of the pandemic. Another statistic showed that women with children were 3 times as likely as fathers to be responsible for a majority of the housework and childcare amid the pandemic. As a result of this, many women are starting to experience burnout. Another statistic said working moms are reporting an additional 20 hours of responsibilities at home during the pandemic, all related to childcare and more on top of their traditional 40-hour work weeks. The delineation between male and female dominated occupations is apparent once again as we see more and more women losing their jobs during the pandemic. While there has been much progress in recent years towards women entering male-dominated professions, there are still large populations of women working in what is considered a female occupation. One study defined gender-based occupations by saying some male-dominated occupations include engineer, architect, and pilot. Neutral occupations include accountant, manager, and pharmacist. female-dominated occupations include bookkeeper, nurse, or secretary. With that being said, female-dominated occupations were among the first jobs to be furloughed or cut entirely during the pandemic. Many of the industries that suffered the most dire impacts from the pandemic include the entertainment industry, hospitality, tourism, and more. Many of the jobs associated with these industries included secretaries or administrative assistants who were seen as non-essential workers and were temporarily released from their jobs. The United Nations entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women quoted, "Women are overrepresented in many of the industries hardest hit by COVID-19, such as food service, retail, and entertainment. For example, 40% of all employed women, which is 510 million women globally, work in hard-hit sectors compared to 36.6% of all employed men. In a global health crisis, even when the need for nurses, a female-dominated profession, is in high demand, the gender wage gap still reflects a startling number for female nurses. The United Nations Women reported that globally, 70% of healthcare workers and first responders are women, and yet they are still not at par with their male counterparts. At 28%, the gender pay gap in the health sector is higher than the overall gender pay gap of 16%. So, what can companies do to protect their women going forward so that they don't lose all of the progression they have made over the last couple of decades to becoming stronger women in the workplace? One of the biggest lessons we all learned in 2020 is that we have to be flexible and adaptable to change. Firms can reduce the social impact of the pandemic on their female employees by allowing increased flexibility within the workplace to adapt to changes in home life. Even with the economy reopening and people returning to work, children are likely to still be in a situation where they have to have either full-time remote distance learning or part-time distance learning for some time. Flexible work can mean multiple different things, such as allowing employees to continue working from home even after others return to the office, helping them balance their hours and scheduling key meetings and other duties at particular times. For example, many students need to take the bus to get to school when they have in-person learning, or maybe they need to be driven in by their parents. Maybe they need to be picked up from school at a certain time. Companies can work around those hours and not schedule mandatory meetings early in the morning or late in the afternoon when parents might have to come in late or skip out early to go take care of their children. Firms also need to trust their employees during these trying times, especially female employees doing triple duty as a full-time worker, mother, and now at-home teacher. Firms can reconsider their FMLA policies, their Family Medical Leave Act, and their paid family leave policies to provide increased flexibility for men as well. If firms had equivalent leave policies for both mothers and fathers, that would allow women to spend less time away from the workplace because the responsibilities could be more evenly split between the two parents. Family leave policies must also include paid family leave, because in these trying times, it is near impossible to provide for a family or a household without a consistent and stable source of income. As you can see, while the world is suffering through such an unprecedented time period, women are bearing a heavy burden of trying to balance their work lives and family lives without having to risk losing their careers and job opportunities they have built for themselves. History may be repeating itself as gender roles are slowly creeping back up into the workplace and home life. Further research might include investigating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on men in the workforce and comparing the results to that of women to determine where a disconnect might exist between the genders in the workforce. Here are my resources for my research today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.